This is the late 90s, I think. It was a beautiful morning in May. I'm walking with John DeGrove actually to graduation. And, it's like 10 minutes walk from the social science building to the auditorium. At that time, I had difficulties putting up any research program to comparative state analysis. In other words, trying to see what are the growth management of different states, what were the growth management acts in different states in the United States. And I could not find any base to compare all these different states and why eventually they did move, it's about 10 states, why they did move on growth management. I think what I did, I went in the tradition, in the good academic tradition, and I looked at a lot of demographic variables, economic variables, political variables. Couldn't find anything in common. So on that walk, I'm telling John, this is my research problem. And John looked at it, and he looks at me and said, it's not what you are looking for. The issue is attitudes. You have to look at perception and attitudes. Growth management is in the eyes of the beholder. It's a problem that has to do with perception and attitude. That minute I knew I'm not going to write this study. I'm going to give it to Tim Chapin because I'm not doing any attitudinal research anymore. But I remember that. And this was, the interesting point is that it was the late 90s when, talks about sustainability, smart growth just began a few years before that. And it took some time to realize the wisdom of this comment. Because if it is about attitude and it is about perception, then really the only way to change it is via education. And that's what we are doing here. It's basically the future is about education. But before that, let me get into a more specific thing that I prepared for you today. You heard about the evolutionary process and the Growth Management Act is an ongoing process. And that basically was my research approach. I look at the three leading policies of the Growth Management Act from 1985 to 2005. I look at the consistency, which was the first policy that was implemented from 85 to 93. That was basically the policy, the review. It was basically top-down policy of review of plans that start in the state all the way down to the local level. The second policy that I looked at was concurrency. Concurrency was the policy that was implemented from 1986 to 93. It's known as a physical policy because it has to do with 6 public facilities like roads, water, parks and recreation, 6 public facilities that must be available concurrent, on this one word, books were reading, concurrent with the impact of the development. That was the physical aspect. But if you take the next step, concurrency has an enormous impact on economic development because the availability of public facilities, the availability of infrastructure actually determine the volume and pace of housing and commercial development, which in turn basically determine the economic growth in local communities in Florida. So concurrency is a very powerful economic policy as well. My third policy was the compact development, which is these are 3 pieces of legislation. The 93 transportation concurrency, which I took as a compact development rather than just concurrency policy. The 96 sustainable communities, and 99 urban infill and redevelopment areas. These were three policies that were legislated in the 1990s. All of them were aimed to enhance compact growth and economic development in the Florida community. In our case here, for example, in South Florida, the idea was to prevent potential sprawl from advancing towards the Everglades and redirect this potential sprawl towards urban area where we have mixed land uses and hopefully increased density. Now, these were the three policies. The research approach that I took was basically when I took the research approach, I looked right away at this idea that we are talking here about 20 years. There is an evolutionary process in the development of the Growth Management Act. So, number one, you cannot do your typical goal outcome program evaluation here. You cannot just look at goals and then what were the outcomes 3-4 years later. This is not what you do in this type of research. I took an approach of policy evaluation where you look at the act for 20 years and you look at the different phases and the development of the act. When I started to work on this concept of policy evaluation, what emerged is a very important, the second concept that emerged is very important was the concept of policy learning. Policy learning is a very important issue now in the academic literature, and it fit right there. Basically, the way I look at policy learning in the context of the Growth Management Act was, let's see, number one, how each act learned from its own experience throughout the years. Number two, how the acts are lending lessons to each other. How the three policies, concurrency, compact development, and consistency, how these three policies are lending lessons to one another. And when you take all this policy learning in each policy and from one policy to another, we can come to an overall evaluation and say something maybe a little bit more, hopefully more insightful about the overall progress or slowdown of the Growth Management Act. Policy learning was also very important to do because the eyes of all states were towards Florida in the 80s and in the 90s. We were the first, largely, Oregon was the first in 1973, true. 1985, we are basically the first urban state to implement a major growth management act. So state and local practitioners were looking to us, academics all over America were looking for us, and policy learning I thought would be a good way to deal with this curiosity. I'm just going to give you the two basic lessons that I suggest we can learn from this evolutionary process of research that involve policy evaluation and policy learning. I think two basic points that we can learn. The number one lesson that I suggest is actually very positive. I suggest that Florida is very good. We are very good in policy frame, in policy approach. We are very good, creative, and innovative in designing a big picture of policy through legislation and through 9J5. I suggest that the most innovative policy was definitely concurrency, but then also came the sustainable communities